We're going to talk about how to find the area of a triangle. Remember, when we're talking about area, you can think of it as you're covering something or filling something in, like if you're painting a wall, how much paint you'll need, that's area. Whereas if you remember perimeter, perimeter is measuring the distance around something. Area, you can think of it as filling something in. And so for a triangle, the formula for the area of a triangle is area equals 1/2 times the base times the height. Now this formula is on the formula sheet, so you don't need to memorize it, but you need to understand how to use it. So 1/2 times b, b stands for base. Base is just the length of one of the legs, times h. H means height. And so the height is actually measured, it is perpendicular to this base. And so we'll show you more what that means graphically here, but it's important to remember that height isn't necessarily one of the legs, but it is the distance that is perpendicular to whichever leg you pick for the base. Remember, 1/2 times b times h, when you have these written beside each other, that means multiplication. So, first example we'll do is we'll use a right triangle. If you're not sure what a right triangle is, you can watch the triangles part 1 video. Let's say this has a leg that's distance of 12 meters and this one is 8 meters. Now this is a right triangle, and so that's usually designated with this little box. That means that this leg and that leg are 90 degrees. They are perpendicular to each other. And so if we want to find the area of this triangle, we can pick, for example, this can be the base. So our b in the formula, base is 12, and the height has to be perpendicular to our base. Well, this just so happens to be perpendicular in a right triangle, so this can be our height. So our height is going to be 8. All we do is plug those numbers into the formula. So area, which we'll denote as A, equals 1/2 times B, so times 12, times H, which is 8. When we write them in parentheses, that means multiplication. So here we have 1/2 times 12 times 8, that equals 48. And remember, it's meters, but with area, it's always meters, it's always squared. So whatever your unit is, if it's inches, yards, whatnot, it's always squared. So that's one way to see if you look at your answers, if it's multiple choice and it has square units, every answer has a square unit, you know you have to do an area problem. So anytime you do an area problem, regardless of the shape, the answer is always going to be in squared units. So here, again, if you're using your calculator, you can remember that a fraction is just a division, so you can plug in 1 divided by 2 times 12 times 8, and you get 48, and it's meters squared. So it's, again, important to remember you're going to square those. Now, let's say we don't have a right triangle, but we have something that looks more like, we'll say something like this. And this is 32 inches. And we'll say this is 10 inches. So here we have the base, B, is 32 inches. But the height is not one of these legs, because remember, the height has to be perpendicular to the base. So it has to be a 90-degree angle. And so what they'll do is, if they're drawing you a picture, they'll put it as a dotted line, and that will mean that that is, and usually draw the square there, and that means that that is a line that is perpendicular to this line. So here, the base, B, is 32, and the height is 10. Now what they might do is put something like, 17 over here, or something like that, in order to throw you off, so that you might choose 17 as the height you need to remember that the height always has to be perpendicular to whatever base you choose. So again, once we have that, we just throw that into the formula. 1/2 times 32 times 10. 1 divided by 2 times 32 times 10 if you're using your calculator. And that's going to get you 160 inches squared. Remember the squared on that. Now if we have an obtuse triangle, it's going to look a little bit different. So if they draw a triangle like that, let's say they say this is 16 yards. To find the height, again, this has to be perpendicular to that base. So they'll draw a little dotted line out here and up here and tell you what the height is like that. So again, it has to be perpendicular, so you're going to extend it out and draw a perpendicular line up to the highest point here. So again, if they write something like 8 yards and 31 yards over here, don't use these two legs as the height. It has to be perpendicular to the base. And so it's not all that length, it's just this short length from there to there. So here we have our base is 16, our height is 5, because we're using this. And the way they'll show that is through these dotted lines. So the area, 1/2 times 16 times 5 equals 40. 40 yards squared is the answer to that. Now, they may not give you a question quite as straightforward where they draw a triangle and then label everything for you. They may give you a word problem, and you might need to do a little bit of algebra. So let's say they tell you that the area of a triangle is 108 inches squared. And they say the base is 12 inches. The question is, what is the height? So here we have a little bit of a word problem, and we need to use some algebra. So if you don't know how to do algebra, watch the algebra videos. So, but all we do is just plug what we know into the formula and solve for what we don't know. So again, use the formula here, area. So the area is 108 equals 1/2 times the base. They give us that the base is 12 times the height. Well, we don't know what the height is. That's what we're trying to solve for. So we have this problem set up. Now we just need to do some algebra, which I'm going to do fairly quickly. So watch the algebra videos if you don't know how to do this. 108, 1/2 of 12 is 6. We're going to divide each side by 6 in order to get h by itself. And we get 18 equals h. So the height for this is 18 inches. One thing that I want you to be aware of, really with any problem, is the units. So here, for example, we were dealing with inches. But let's say that they gave you a triangle that looked like this, and this is not actually drawn to scale, but they say this is 2 feet and this is 9 inches. And they ask you what's the area of the triangle. So you might just go off and let's say this is a right triangle. Go off and say 1/2 times base times height. But here we have inches and here we have feet. And so before you do any problem, make sure you are looking at the same units, because you can't mix units. You can't do 1/2 times 2 times 9 because they're not the same units. 2 feet is not the same as 2 inches. So feet and inches are different. So you have to get into a common unit. I think it's always easier to go to the smaller unit. So inches are smaller than feet, so I would change everything to inches. And so you can change everything to feet, but for me it's always easier to multiply than it is to divide, because you may end up working in fractions if you divide. So you have to know, and everyone should know, 1 foot is 12 inches. You should also know, by the way, that 1 yard is 3 feet, so know that as well. But for this problem, 1 foot equals 12 inches, so 2 feet is how many inches? 2 times 12, so this is 24 inches. So now we can do the problem where area equals 1/2 times base, 24, times height, 9. If you plug that in your calculator, you're going to get 108 inches squared. So always look at the units and change them. You can change them to feet or change them to inches, doesn't matter. I guess you probably also want to look at what the answers are in and change it to whatever unit that is. And remember, 1 foot equals 12 inches, so 2 feet, you just multiply that by 2. 3 feet, you multiply that by 3. Once you're in the same units, then just apply the formula.